Every time you've ever felt alone, felt like someone was watching you, Silent Hill has been there. More than any other survival horror series before or after, Silent Hill has been decorated as a masterwork of psychological horror, first class in atmosphere, and unrivaled in immersion. You will never see a fanbase more ravenously passionate about horror than Konami's foray into the genre. Inarguably the most famous game in the franchise is Silent Hill 2, which recently received a remake that has been showered in praise and has rehydrated the fanbase, as well as introducing a whole new generation to the franchise past just watching video essays. These two versions of the same game are easily the most recommended entries for newcomers, and while I fully understand why, people who start with 2 miss the chance to experience the dread and atmosphere of the first entry in the series, Silent Hill 1. The PlayStation 1 had never seen a game like this before, and not until the PlayStation 2 did it ever again. The first Silent Hill has been almost left in the dust, which is a crying shame, because in a lot of ways, 1's scares and atmosphere might be the best in the series. While the franchise continues to hit new heights, it's important to remind people of its origins, because Silent Hill 1 is crucial to understanding the franchise, but it's a game you have to call Silent Hill 1, rather than just Silent Hill, due to its far more famous sister games. This video will be a dissection of the gameplay, story, and history of Silent Hill 1's development, all things crucial to understanding it, but also why it's so forgotten compared to its sister games. Hi, my name is Peter, and I create videos on strange, obscure, and underrated games all the time. So leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like these. Perhaps consider joining my Patreon, full of exclusive videos and early previews. In order to achieve anything, you have to stand on the shoulders of giants. And that's just what the infamous Japanese company Konami planned on doing. Capcom's Resident Evil was an outrageous success, and pushed the envelope for what horror games could truly achieve. Beforehand, they were often methodical, point-and-click games that leaned more on mystery and dialogue with pre-rendered environments and 2D sprites. Using the newfound power of the PlayStation, a fully 3D game with voiced characters, intricate combat, multiple characters, was not only possible, it quickly became the standard. Countless companies were throwing their hats into the ring with their own horror franchises, and Konami was no different. They saw Capcom's success, and in the same year as Resident Evil 1 was released, they began to work on a competitor franchise, but not in the way you would expect. Since 3D technology was so new and scarcely understood, the old guard of the company decided to conduct an experiment. With a purportedly minuscule, shoestring budget, they would recruit largely fresh-faced developers, even college students, to create this game. You would think such an inexperienced team trying to follow in the footsteps of such a monumental release like Resident Evil would end up in disaster. But even if Konami didn't know it, this ragtag group of developers, dubbed Team Silent overseas, were some of the most dedicated and talented creators the PlayStation had ever seen. The world just didn't know it yet. Despite Team Silent being composed of less than 20 people, some of which didn't even have previous video game experience, they had some incredibly strong ideas on the project. They admired the Western inspirations Resident Evil took, and they brought their own American examples. The works of David Lynch and Stephen King were especially foundational. Team Silent kept the fear of being chased by unearthly monsters and having to carefully manage ammunition for guns, but took a couple steps in a different direction. By focusing far more on ambience, the fear of the unknown, feeling just wrong, watched, peered, an aura of unease and malevolence. The exact timeline of development is murky, but I highly recommend the Gaming Muses documentary series on Team Silent and their exploits. It's easily the best breakdown of the topic online, and I heavily drew from it for research. I had to explain the makeup for Team Silent to illustrate the circumstances of how this game came to be. A group of inexperienced, new developers were given a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to prove themselves, and prove themselves they did. The only thing riskier than that would be to use public Wi-Fi unprotected, which is something our kind sponsor of today's video, our friends at Surfshark VPN, can help us with. You know the name, but what can Surfshark really do for you? Well, It's going to guarantee protection from public Wi-Fi, which is host to a lot of nefarious people who can very easily access your private info because of how unprotected you are. So whatever info you need to be private can stay that way, which is how I protect my poor virgin.txt file containing all the games I'm going to make videos on in the future. Hey! You didn't see that. The benefit of their VPN allows you to change the location of your system to anywhere in the world, which can easily get around streaming services' brutal content ID system, meaning you can access just about any country's wide selection of films and shows, all the foreign films and television shows you could ever watch. Canadian Netflix used to be good, you know, but I'll take German Netflix instead, thank you. And if that wasn't enough, then you have some top-shelf customer service that's 24 hours and 7 days a week. And if that wasn't enough, you have a 30-day money-back guarantee, no questions asked. I've got a coupon code, SharkPeter, which allows you to get 4 months totally free. Yes, you heard me right. Look, the world is so online now, so you're doing yourself a disservice by not having some kind of barrier between your private info and the scary general public. So my link in the description is going to help set you right. I don't normally do sponsorships, but I like the folks over at Surfshark. Plus, I'd spend all of my sponsorship money on expensive PlayStation 2 games so I can review them. No, I'm not joking. If you want reviews of any of these games, you know what to do. Back to the video. Oh dear. I was a good little boy and purchased a copy for way more than I cared to admit, but the secondhand market has not treated this franchise too well, so you might need to sail the 7 seas for this one. We awaken after crashing our car. We can't make a few steps without realizing our daughter, Cheryl, is nowhere to be found. So we have to go look for her. First thing you'll notice is... Oh, no, no, no! What are these controls? What's going on? Why can't I move properly? Why am I backing up? So, anyone who isn't familiar with late 90s 3D games is going to come to the same realization that I did. This game has tank controls. To people who owned a PS1 and played the game back in 1999, this is of no concern. But Silent Hill as a franchise has enormous staying power and continues to be relevant to this day. So the players who weren't 90s kids, like me, have to come to terms that 3D games were just different back then. People now are used to free controlling cameras and analog sticks, but creating a game of this magnitude in the 90s required for the controls to be constructed in a very particular way, and that's why we walk around like we have stool in our jeans. You move in the direction the character faces and have to manually steer them, like a tank, hence the name. This makes moving left or right, or forbid going backwards, very cumbersome to people not used to this. Think of controlling the character like driving a car. You need to focus on steering and acceleration, in a way. We're in a generation of re-releases, and nearly every old game that previously had tank controls either removed them entirely or have made them alternative control schemes. But Silent Hill 1 remains undaunted, which proves to be easily one of the biggest filters for new players. And man, get over it. Yeah, the tank controls really aren't that bad. I was very confused my first time playing, since I'm used to the PlayStation 2 onwards, but this opening sequence gives you infinite time to figure out how this guy controls. It may look unorthodox and clunky, but for the most part, the control scheme is fine, and works for this game just fine. If tank controls are where you draw the line for old games, then you're really missing out on one of the greatest horror games ever made, and you're going to have a huge blind spot for such an influential avenue of the medium that people are still taking inspiration from. Just take your time and adjust your expectations. If you're really stuck, maybe look at a PDF print of the manual the game came with. You can find out a lot of interesting info here that really isn't stated in-game. Rather than hawking about the controls, let's settle in the atmosphere. As soon as you step out of the car, it's quiet. Too quiet. The town doesn't have anyone else in it. and you can hardly see a foot in front of you since the fog is almost supernaturally strong here. Snowflakes drift down gently as dark ambience hums and drones. We weave through an alleyway that seems to last forever, the buildings only revealing themselves the closer you get to it. It isn't long until things become unhinged. If the shredded corpse of an unknown creature wasn't enough of a hint that things aren't as they should be, there's a growing siren howling in the background. The camera shifts and twists at awkward angles, the sky darkens, and blood begins to pool and rain from the sky. The sirens get louder as we approach twisted and gnarled fences and hit a dead end, and it isn't too long until we're surrounded. Let me explain why this opening stands head and shoulders above its comrades. Consider how PlayStation games started back in the 90s. You had to balance introducing the story and characters, but also showcase the technology at hand to impress you while slowly introducing you to everything. Instead, it is solely dedicated to the careful tuning of the Devil's Lyric, throwing you headfirst into a spine-chilling atmosphere. Just compare the opening of this game that inspired Silent Hill.
Barry! Where's Barry?
Well, I'm sorry, but he's probably...
I don't mean to disrespect or downplay how impressive Resident Evil was at the time, because it absolutely was mind-blowing to 90s kids, but compared to Silent Hill, there's such a careful construction of ambience and raw, uncut soul, a dedication to feeling cinematic, a guiding presence through America's most twisted town. The presentation is unbelievably beyond its means, something only matched by industry giants like Squaresoft during its peak, which makes Silent Hill's micro-budget and team even more shocking. That with the fraction of the money, Konami's team of relative newbies, they were able to create one of the best openings on the console, if not the genre. I can't sing its praises enough. It's perfectly eerie, uncomfortable, you don't get a good view on anything here, so you're never really sure what you're looking at, playing perfectly into the fear of the unknown, something established by the very fog the town is drowned in. But we need to move on. We meet up with the police officer. We get some very important exposition. This is Harry Mason, a writer looking for a vacation with his 7-year-old daughter, Cheryl, the one who went missing. And this is Sybil Bennett, voiced by Suzanne Papa, a cop from the next town over, investigating for unclear reasons. They find out the phones and radios all over town are dead, but Harry is still determined to find his daughter, no matter what. Despite these two characters being on the same page, the entire conversation feels hazy and uncomfortable. The music is spaced out and dissonant, but not to the point of being outright macabre, just tense. The characters are far apart from each other, their body language is closed off, making what would be just a regular exchange feel like an endeavor.
Where is everybody?
Harry, before he can rush off into the mist, receives a gun from Sybil, warning him to be careful with it before she leaves before him to try and find help, or at least just someone who could explain what's going on in town and where everyone is. We find a red notepad of sorts on the counter, brightly contrasted against everything else as very earthy tones, and perhaps motivated by his profession, Harry decides to write down notes every time he sees one of these, which introduces us to the very diegetic save point system. Just interact with these pads whenever you see them to save, you get multiple save slots, and you're done. These are especially generously placed. They are sometimes 2 to 3 in each landmark area, and plenty of far-flung locations across the map have them, so there's never a moment you'll be losing a lot of progress by fault of no save point. The last things we can take are a town map, a flashlight, and a suspiciously broken radio that doesn't seem to play. Oh, it does?
What's that? Huh, radio. What's going on with that radio?
Oh god damn it, man, again? What am I supposed to do when I can't hit this thing? What the hell is going on? I don't mean to do a second freak out, But wow, is this any way to introduce players to the shooting mechanic? You're given so little time to figure out what to do that anyone who hasn't played this game before is probably just gonna die right away. It's an effective scare, but at the cost of being a really botched tutorial. There was thought put into this segment. Sybil's dialogue isn't exactly subtle, but was this really the best way to teach people? I'm not asking for Harry to get intrusive prompts that you have to manually hold a button to clear off the screen, but this is a rough filter for newbies. So many people are likely to quit right here, because if you aren't used to this kind of game, hell, I died more times than I care to count on my first run. So I had to force myself to keep going and try and clear this part. But shooting works like this. The right trigger puts Harry into a shooting stance. So you just point him in the direction of the foe, then hit X. You sometimes have to swivel him around left or right, or back up with the down button, but it's all about your position. Harry will lock onto a single enemy with no problem following this. So just hammer bullets into this thing, and we're clear. Jeez, man. What a rude awakening. I understand they wanted a quick and frenetic tutorial on combat, but when that involves such a slim margin for error that has you often restarting from the title screen to the loading screen to a potential cutscene to getting all that again, you run into some frustration, no? Regardless, after we take down whatever that is, we get to explore the town of Silent Hill, and our only clue on where Cheryl might be is the alleyway we were just at. This is the point where nearly everything the game has to offer is laid bare, made accessible to you. So we can really jump into any topic at this point, but which one do we choose? It's inescapable, this fog. It's so thick that it envelops absolutely everything until you're right next to it. It's not just careful consideration for atmosphere, take a shot every time I say that word, but a clever tool for disguising technical limitations. You've probably heard this story before. Naoto Oshima, the game's primary programmer, made the fog so overwhelming to hide the game's rather egregious pop-ups to ensure smooth performance and immersion. Most games of their time had pre-rendered backgrounds, but I believe Silent Hill's aren't, which would make the game chug like Drakengard 3 otherwise. It's a well-known fact at this point, so I won't dwell on it, but it's such a crucial part in illustrating how clever and talented Team Silent was. It goes the extra mile in making the player feel uneasy, because your surroundings are never entirely prompted, so as you navigate the town, you're never quite sure what's just ahead of you. So many warped creatures lie ahead, but it never feels like a jump scare when you encounter them, because you remember the radio you picked up? It rings whenever there's an enemy nearby. But that sound also attracts them closer to you, so you can choose to turn it off manually, which I highly recommend you do. Otherwise you put yourself in a lot of danger. If you haven't noticed it already, the lack of a HUD in any form is another exercise in total player immersion. It gives you an uncropped view of your surroundings. No distractions. The vibe of the unknowable is something Silent Hill deals with like playing cards. It's raw, palpable, you can feel it in the back of your throat. Despite Konami being a Japanese studio, the decision to set the game in small-town America was a masterstroke on their behalf, because it connected with Western players tremendously, depending where you're from. You see, I have a curse to bear. I'm Canadian. The morning fog, the gentle snowfall of winter's arrival. This is all familiar to me. Far too much so. This is my life. Many a day have I tread in the dim early hours of the morning during winter's first breath, where the snow is here, but it's still not quite cold enough to stick on the ground, melting away on the road instead. There's a spectrum between something uncanny and nostalgic, and Silent Hill's environments hit a balance between the two, a perfect 50%. It reminds me of the days where I would walk to college at 6:30 a.m. in late October and early November, the exact time frame I wrote this script and released this video. The actual layout of Silent Hill is critically important. If the town's design makes no sense, then how are players supposed to have fun? Well, Silent Hill takes an old school approach. Instead of objective markers and mini-maps, we get an actual map. Triangle brings up the map of each location you're in, as long as you've collected it, which is something you can miss, and which I have missed in the past. Do not recommend skipping the maps. Your location is marked by the green arrow, and some context-sensitive locations are marked in red. Landmarks and street names are highlighted, but you can also use the road signs to remember your location. I'm part of the Google Maps generation, so I had to constantly check the map every minute or so. But the main town of Silent Hill is very well put together. It only takes a few minutes to cross a road, so the town gives the illusion of appearing larger than it really is. I have a lot of things to say about the map of this game, especially in the interiors, but for now, know that the main area of Silent Hill, Old Silent Hill, is well constructed and never feels like you're totally lost. I do kind of wish we were able to set our own markers, but maybe that's asking too much. Our only objective for now is to find the alleyway where we're just at, something we've marked down. Upon revisiting, the location doesn't give us any of the viscera we saw previously, but we do find Cheryl's sketchbook with a note saying that she went to the school in the bottom left corner of the map. We try to go there, but each and every street that could possibly lead to the school has collapsed, which is a problem. On the collapse road by Matheson, we can find some notes telling us to search for a doghouse on Levin Street, right around the corner. That doghouse contains a key that allows you to enter this guy's house and stockpile unuseful items, save, and a back door, but it has several locks on it. But the map here points out several spots on the map to investigate. Not exactly a subtle way to tell the player where to go, but there was some serious legwork involved to go here, you'll see later. The X's on the map are roughly where you should be, but specific areas have high concentration of enemies on the map, so take that as your pointer, not to get lost. We see all kind of locales. A small wooden beam to walk across, a basketball course where someone used a severed dog head to shoot hoops, and a crashed cop car. There aren't any signs of her, but we just have to hope that Sybil wasn't driving off into the inky abyss. The small design of the town leads you to create landmarks in specific locations in order to tell where to go. Or you could just open up the map 400 times. Even using the map feels natural. It's literally a town map Harry picks up to navigate, and you'll find these maps all over the game in various interiors that make sense. Town bulletin boards on top of desks. They're in smart locations at the very start of each area. You can't even look at the map in dark areas without your flashlight. It's fantastically immersive for something so simple. Harry just feels like a man trying to find out where to go, the exact sense of being lost Team Silent wanted to embark. There's a lot more to the maps in the game, but the beginning introduction to the town of Silent Hill feels carefully constructed and intelligent. It never steps into being too absurd or convoluted or non-Euclidean. The town is abandoned, not alien. What's Harry's deal, anyways? In his own words, Harry is a father who went to go on for a vacation with his daughter Cheryl, who has gone missing. The manual of the game tells a larger story, however. Harry is 32 years old and a writer, a very cliché but expected occupation for a horror protagonist. Harry lost his wife to a disease, which cast a shadow over his soul, as the manual puts it, making him a single father to Cheryl. If just finding his kid wasn't enough of a motivation, the fact he's a widow steals his bravery even more. Harry is not a macho action hero or special with any supernatural powers, like the police officers of Resident Evil, the psychics of Galarians, or whatever Aya from Parasite Eve was supposed to be. Harry is just a man, and not a very athletic one. He doesn't have a stamina bar, but he heaves and pants heavily when you stop sprinting. He's clumsy and he runs into walls and objects at full force. He isn't very good with guns, and missing his shots is programmed into the game to drive that point home. You can miss point-blank shots. While it's frustrating at times, it's too cool not to mention. So much work was done into making this guy feel like, well, just a guy. If I was stuck in Silent Hill, I would probably perform about the same as Harry. It doesn't highlight any faults in other games to have more physical or even supernatural protagonists. Those characters work for their respective stories, but Harry is such an everyman that his only exceptional trait is his bravery, which led him to places most people wouldn't even go with a gun. I will say Harry's appearance is interesting. PS1 character models get a lot of flack now for looking really weird, which they do, but it was still the days of early 3D. This was incredible for the time, or so I'm told. Plus, this was all supposed to be played on a CRT. It's hard to capture, but it looks so much better being played on a TV that displays it as it was meant to. OBS just didn't do it justice. Even his name and appearance evoke no strong reactions. He lacks outward distinction, but a deeper investigation reveals more. Blazer, jeans, short brown hair. You could lose him in a crowd of wasps anywhere in America. Even his name, Harry Mason, is as common as it gets. Harry can often mean ruler of the home, reflecting his status as male patriarch, and Mason refers to masonry, as in building structure out of stone or bricks. A humble English surname. Harry's name reflects the hearth of home, but also his status as a provider to his family, something that has been shaken with his dead wife and missing daughter, Cheryl. Cheryl even means darling or beloved in French, another reminder of how immensely Harry cares for her. All this reinforces Harry's status as an everyman, but also a devoted father and widowed husband. You can easily fill the blanks of a greater backstory with this information. I've touched on it a couple times, but combat in this game is a little, weird. Gunplay is simple, and I've explained it already. Just get into position and slam down X. You can switch between multiple targets via analog stick, but I don't think I ever encountered more than 2 enemies coming at you at once, ever. Always remember to double tap. Reloading happens promptly after you empty a clip or magazine, so you can manually reload in the menu. This screen is very cool. It tracks all of your items, obviously, but the portrait in the top left is your health meter, green for healthy, yellow or brown for depleted, and red for near death. We have several items dedicated to healing you, usually taking the form of health drinks or first aid kits, which are found inside buildings and around the map. It is cumbersome to have to pause the game every time to heal, however, because Harry won't indicate if he's near death outside of his health bar on that menu, so pausing is something you will unfortunately become very acquainted with. And melee weapons, oh buddy, that I'm gonna save for another time. Obviously, they rely on no ammo, but just trust me, they suck. I think I mentioned already, but this radio makes a loud ringing noise when enemies are approaching, but that also alerts them to you. You can turn this off in the menu to avoid this entirely, which is what I did. You can choose to take down everything in sight to make a safe path, or risk being attacked and saving ammunition. This mostly applies for the town, however. Trying to run past enemies in the building is a pretty tall task, so you best engage with the combat now to learn how it works. Though I have heard some reports that it wasn't entirely an intended feature, that people running away from the encounters was just something you could do, but it wasn't meant. It's kind of a topic of debate, but having to sort all these Japanese interviews, I don't know, don't worry about it. If it wasn't glaringly, screamingly obvious by now, Team Silent took heavy inspiration from American films and novels, and you can see it literally everywhere. Half the names of Silent Hill's streets come from different horror authors. It all just screams Westaboo. Even Silent Hill's most iconic aspect, the ever-present fog, was something lifted from Stephen King's novella, The Fog, made famous by its movie adaptation. I think at one point Konami wanted to make a straight-up game adaptation about the novella. They were putting plans to travel to America and ask King about it, but there just wasn't the magic. So they made their own original work. Silent Hill is even set in Maine, which is such a common location for King to set his stories that it's a running gag. Another piece of Western entertainment that served as a crucial inspiration for the entire franchise is Jacob's Ladder. And just by looking at basically any of the scary scenes, it's proof enough visually. But there are a lot more specific references you will see in certain dungeons or story parts. The setting feels American. An uninformed player could easily be convinced an American team made this game. Harry's occupation as a writer, the small-town America setting, some of the commentary on organized religion, it's all there. There are so many little references to Western entertainment and literature that I highly recommend you just surf a wiki page, because trying to name all of them would be a nightmare and bloat the already excessive video runtime. One of the funnier ones I have to mention is that the school we're heading to, Midwich, is very clearly modeled after the school from Kindergarten Cop, which is a very strange creative choice, but it reflects how much Team Silent had to consume to immerse themselves in this Western world, to create a believable setting, and it worked quite well, even if some of these references are unorthodox. I should finally mention the director of this game, Keiichiro Toyama. He was the director that steered this crazy ship, and through scant interviews transcribed across the net, he confirms all the things I've mentioned thus far. Toyama is a very interesting figure. He loosely worked with Hideo Kojima very early on in his career as a character designer for Snatcher, so it's incredible that he's given the chance to be a director for such a wild project. Toyama's childhood of trying to investigate ghosts and reading horror novels, his fear of the dark inspired so much of his work, and Silent Hill is the most obvious result of that. He grew up in the outskirts of a city called Miyakanajo, which, from its limited images, looks comfy and easygoing. Toyama's taste ranges much more on the thriller side than outright horror, exchanging the buckets of blood for an atmosphere of unease. If I may, there are a lot of connections I feel between the grand US of A and the small island country of Japan, because it seems like the experience of a small, sleepy town as the battlegrounds for a supernatural showdown seem almost universal amongst modern human culture. A recurring location from someone deeply entrenched in the mind as someone like Joseph Campbell could orate far more tantalizingly than I. Team Silent and Toyama's life in Japan did more to inform his sense of dread and familiarity with the trope of a haunted town, even under the guise of trying to replicate American novels. Maybe I've just spent too much time inside and my brain is leaking through my ears, but I feel a certain kinship, a connection across the sea with the land of the rising sun. Even if Silent Hill is American, so much of this game's cultural background, so to speak, speaks clearly to me as a Canadian. Just look at this place, it looks like Hamilton, Ontario. Both Canada and Japan are so closely connected to their larger, more famous sister countries, perhaps in spite of them, but they are still quite distinct. The circumstances of our existences are similar, and what Silent Hill communicates transcended language barriers and into something that speaks with the softness of a butterfly and the firmness of a bullet. I got their letter, and now they've got my song. Getting kind of ahead of myself, sorry. Don't lie, you were looking at this one the entire time when this thing came up, weren't you? Well, there's good reason for that. Nearly every other topic I've thus talked about is paramount. It squeals in comparison to this one, because for most people, frustration will be the first experience they have with this game's opening. I've spent a lot of time praising the map and how it feels to navigate, but here comes the rug pull. I've been writing this section from my perspective as someone playing this game for a second and even third time. Did I feel this way about the game my first playthrough? No, not at all. Playing Silent Hill 1 for the first time in the beginning was an incredibly tedious and painful process for a lot of reasons. I've talked about the controls, but as a zoomer, it still took me time to figure out how this game worked, since its scheme seemed so ancient by comparison. I'm just taking baby steps on controlling Harry by this point, yet I'm expected to do so much heavy lifting. Finding the alleyway is pretty easy, but the crumbled roads are a pretty rude awakening. This means you have to run around literally everywhere in this western part of town, only to find no entrances to the school. Remember the notes telling you to find the doghouse, to find the key, to lead you to the door you need to go to? I ran past and rummaged through that doghouse several times, but that key does not appear until you find that note for whatever reason. It's right there, but it just doesn't work until you progress linearly. Why? It would have been so much easier if you had the freedom to explore and solve the puzzles without funding the specific notes in that one part of town, that you might even find at the very end of your search, spending how much time going to every single location, then finding it, and then smacking yourself on the forehead because you went through that doghouse 3 times beforehand. You can find the other keys needed without this, but the doghouse key is mysteriously exempt. Well, finding that process annoying might depend on the person and how they feel about being left to their own devices. I am glad there isn't any annoying pop-up tutorials that a modern game would have, so Twitch streamers can play it, but the notes still tell you exactly where to go, and many of these locations are outright marked for you, so it's a mix of being left up to your own devices and being told where to go. But you know what isn't left up to the player's opinion? The melee system. Oh god, the melee system. So, gum combat is functional, if clunky. It's fine. But the melee combat is outrageously terrible, to an objective point. So you get 2 melee weapons by this point. A knife found in the diner and the pipe found by Cheryl's note. They are both so clunky, so unwieldy and difficult to use. Harry takes a lifetime to swing any weapon, which makes timing something incredibly important to master very quickly. And by master, I mean keep dying to the dinosaurs and dogs roaming around Silent Hill, because it's a real tough ask to have hits connect with them, let alone do that before you get attacked. You know, don't give me that it's bad on purpose to make it scary or nonsense. The gunplay is functional, but melee weapons are not. Why do the half measure? You have to be so specific and careful just to hit a dog with a pipe. Don't even bother using the knife. It does not work. I don't care what anyone says, that thing does not work. But the dinosaurs are just out of the question for melee. Don't even bother. So you get worse range, tricky timing, and worse damage. For what? Not requiring ammo? Give me a break. That doesn't work too well for us because ammo is extremely common on the map. So common that I had nearly maxed out my inventory for pistol rounds before I even entered the school. At least I did on this recording. During my first playthrough on PlayStation Vita, that was not the case. I was figuring out the map system first, so finding ammo reserves wasn't something I was even thinking of. So the little bullets I had were very quickly depleted and I was stuck with the lead pipe, which is basically certain death in the main town if you don't know exactly what you're doing and have practice, which led me to die, find a key, then die. There is nuance to the melee weapons. There are different button combos to press for different attacks, but they're all bumbleclat. Maybe it just got filtered at the start. I'm not trying to say how this is objectively how it's going to go for everyone, but I'm not alone in thinking this game has a tough opening, which proves to be another hurdle for people trying to play this game, at least without a guide. I know some of you PSX purists might scoff at that statement, but how many people who have finished playing the remake of Silent Hill 2 are interested in playing the first? No, you hear that it's too primitive, too ugly looking, too much of this and too much of that, and part of the reason why many people are hesitant to even try the game. Some of these might be matter of opinion, like getting lost in the map might have been a me thing, but combat being so clunky is a serious issue this game has. For people like me, it required about a solid hour of legwork of reloading saves and working through all the clashing elements the game throws at you. But I began to start remembering locations and started ignoring enemies outright to save ammo and just avoid melee combat together. If you didn't like the first hour of gameplay here, then I wouldn't recommend continuing. For all its faults, this vertical slice is emblematic of nearly everything you will experience in Silent Hill, good and bad, minus some of the dedicated puzzles and storyline, but its presentation, combat, exploration, and ambience are established immediately. It's just a tough ask where you say, well, you'll learn how to actually navigate, and you'll find that things that you thought were bad were good, but some things that are bad, like the melee combat, just kind of stay bad, and you shouldn't do it at all, and then just avoid all enemies. Like, it's a bit of a tougher ask, you know what I mean? It's harder to convince a friend to play this. But anyways, I got the keys I needed to unlock the Eclipse door. The Woodman key, the Scarecrow key, and the Lion key. A reference to the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Wait, Woodman? I know he's called the Tin Woodman, but literally everyone who isn't 120 years old calls him the Tin Man. Why is he the Woodman? Anyways, we get back to the doghouse, and we use all the keys to unlock the back door. The entire town has suddenly dipped into darkness, which allows our flashlight to flex the incredibly dynamic lighting system, easily one of the best on the console. This leads us to a back alley that actually takes us to Midwich to find Cheryl. Midwich serves as our first dungeon or interior location, and it makes a tremendous first impression. The school is quiet as a mouse, our footsteps the only noise around. We're given all we need right at the start, a map, a save point, and even some blood-written riddles that will surely lead to future puzzles. Check out this gnarly painting of a grimy door with strung-up bodies on it. Seeing the Jacob's Ladder parallels now? It isn't long before we meet our main enemies of the school, the Grey Children. They stalk halls and classrooms and slowly make their way over to you and stab you with their little knives. Or just grab onto your legs. God damn, they do that a lot. These things are annoying. For once, you can actually use your pipe weapon. Since these things are so slow, hitting them with the pipe isn't entirely unreasonable, and avoiding enemies in the cramped hallways is a lot more demanding. Remember to double tap. Also, fun fact, the European version doesn't have the Grey Children enemy, probably because they didn't like the idea of Harry stomping on little kids' heads and killing them. It's an interesting cultural difference, because Americans are presumably fine with this. Wait, why are there kid enemies in this game? Why are there dinosaurs and ghosts? I never even thought about that. What are these things doing in Silent Hill exactly? I highly recommend you turn on the radio here, since it's so dark and the gray children tend to blend into it. But the game decides to outright troll you in specific rooms and activates the radio when there's no danger, just to put you on edge. It's used so sparingly that it never feels cheap, but more like a cruel practical joke, a joke that I love. Let me explain how the maps and interiors work. Each major room is labeled, including which doors connect to different rooms and corridors. Many of these doors are locked, but there's a two-tier system to lock doors. First is just locked doors, and these can be unlocked by finding the other side. These act as methods to connect the dungeons together. Whenever you progress further, you unlock a door to head back to useful areas for puzzle requirements or a save point. The second kind of lock will say the door is jammed or broken, which means don't bother, because you're not getting in. Pressing up and down will reveal any additional floors the map has. So the school has a first floor, second, a roof, and a basement. You can flip through these at will, and your position is always tracked. It's all cohesive, but there is a flaw here. Specific rooms are only really labeled on the map and not in the building itself, which is a huge shame because there's basically no way to tell doors apart when not using the map, and constantly opening up the map to track which room you're in slows down progress to a screaming halt. Maybe some people can memorize all this, but not me. I'm too weak. What sets apart this door from this door? The second floor is where things get interesting. We see a hand clutching some kind of object firmly, too firmly to move. But do you remember some of those bloody writings by the entrance? 10 o'clock, gold in an old man's palm, exchange for sage's water. Doesn't even rhyme. This means explore the science lab to find a chemical bottle to pour on the hand to dissolve it and pick up a gold medallion. The other verse mentioned something about silver at noon, so we go to another room to find... Oh god, it's a piano puzzle. I hate these, man. Nearly every one of these goddamn survival horror games has one of these stupid puzzles because there's one in Resi, and they all suck. This puzzle is quite simple in retrospect, actually. It's a big stupid poem about how birds swooping up and down, all the birds are black or white. So that matches the colors of the piano keys, so you memorize the order of the birds and the matching keys, and you get the silver medallion. Or do you? You actually can't do this puzzle until you interact with a clock tower in the main courtyard with the two spots for said medallions. But you can do the gold one just fine. Why do you need to check this? I did a lot of things out of order because I just solved them as I found them, but with inconsistent results. Man, I know what I'm doing second time around, just let me finish the damn puzzles. It sucks when you know exactly what you're doing, but the game forces you to occasionally play by its means strictly, but sometimes lets you do whatever you want. It's inconsistent and it bothers me. We place the silver and gold medallions, but there's one more part to the poem. Something about boiling heat. Now where would that be? Oh, the boiler room, the basement, of course. We go all the way downstairs and flick on the switch to activate the clock tower, which we can enter only to come out the same courtyard, but different. The snow is replaced by rain. There's a mysterious mark that I'm positive wasn't there before. The map even confirms it. We're not in the same school as before. Welcome to the Nightmare School, a flipped, inverse version of the school we were just at, but much more gruesome to behold. The floors become metal grates. Everything is stained with rust and blood. Human bodies are strung up carelessly. There's death and decay everywhere, but also a unique sort of industrial look that makes this place seem like a nightmare factory. And of course, the music changes from a gentle, slow ambient sound to a violent, aggressive track that plays like a metal pipe being banged against a piano, which will help me transition into talking about the game's music. I've played many of the haunting, slow tracks before this, and they all teeter the line between ominous and off-putting. But the other world segments, as they are called, are the total opposite. Loud, bloody, in your face. We get a taste of it in the opening, and now we have an entire dungeon. Akira Yamaoka is the game's musical composer, and easily the most famous member of Team Silent. It's not hard to see why. Unlike most of his colleagues, Yamaoka had a much more decorated career by comparison, even from the beginning. was a prodigal talent for the genre mixing and sampling ability. Just take a listen of how Yamaoka was able to take ordinary sounding samples of electronic noise and turn it into something horrifying, thanks to the efforts of Gilliam-san for compiling this. Some of the more relaxing tracks used when things are calm and safe have a very faint rock and roll tune to them, still in the realm of dark melodies, but you can softly headbang to them. Many other tracks lack a traditional melody, instead featuring harsh, dissonant noises, because Yamaoka would slam objects into the ground for sampling, to create a lived-in and chaotic OST that would follow Harry throughout. It's experimental, it's haphazard, but it fits like a glove. It speaks for itself, really. We can find some items in this nightmare school, like a rubber ball and a picture card of a familiar-looking door that can be unlocked another door. If you enter the boys' bathroom on the first floor, you find a strung-up body and blood on the wall that spells out "The monster lurks," as well as her second firearm, the shotgun. Much less range than our handgun, but packs a serious punch. But there is much less ammo for it around the map, so use it wisely. The girls' bathroom. If you enter, there's nothing inside. But when you leave, you get teleported to the second floor to find ammunition for it. But you only know that if you check your map, another subtle way of throwing off the player. But the long loading time does kinda give it away. All the phones here don't work. Or do they?
Cheryl!
In the original classroom, there was a bulging locker with a cat inside. Just a tease. But in the other world, that locker is returned. And inside is nothing. Well, let's move on and... Oh, there's our library reserve key. We can access totally different rooms compared to the original school, so it feels fresh to explore this nightmare world. We can find some books scattered around, telling the tale of the monster that lurks. This specific book is referencing manifestations coming from people's psyche affecting the world outside, but particularly from young girls. So our horrific surroundings are strongly implied to be a psychic manifestation, but not coming from Harry, but perhaps from Cheryl. Seems like a very disturbing series of thoughts for a 7-year-old girl. The second book describes a children's fable about a giant lizard that's impervious to damage, except for when it opens its mouth. Wonder what that could mean. After obtaining our final key with help from that rubber ball, we reach this stupid-ass, annoying valve puzzle that can suck my dick. There's no real strategy, just keep spinning valves until the path is clear. What a waste of time. Here's a trick. Turn the left valve right once, and the right valve left twice. It will always open up for you. God, that sucked, I hated it. We get to our first boss battle, and it's a boss battle of all time. All you need to do is just shoot him until he opens his mouth, then just shoot his exposed mouth, and you win. Anyone who's ever fought a boss fight before should pretty easily understand that from the get-go. So I feel like the book outright telling you how to win this fight was just not needed. The hand was revealed far too early for such a basic fight. Backing up and firing at the same time is very awkward, but this lizard is so slow that it won't even touch you if you keep moving regularly.
What was that?
After the lizard is defeated, we see a young girl, older than Cheryl, but shares a remarkable resemblance to her. The nightmare world is faded, and we're back to the regular school. Silent Hill's snow has returned, and we hear the ringing of church bells. Welcome to the second half of the game. Getting to the town's Balkan church is a very easy effort compared to finding the school. The town's layout seems to have changed while we were away. Roads previously closed off are now open, and vice versa. You'll meet this little slice of heaven, voiced by Liz Mamarski, who gives a hammy but delightfully chilling performance.
I've been expecting you. It was foretold by gyromancy.
She's very obviously out of her mind, but she seems to know about Cheryl and wants to help us. With no time to waste, she instructs us to head to the Alchemilla Hospital before it's too late, implying something devious will come in the future. But not before leaving some parting gifts. A key to the town's drawbridge, and an item called the Flauros, some kind of pyramid that gives some serious Hellraiser vibes. Despite how brief this meeting is, there's a lot to analyze here. Despite this being a House of the Lord, there are far more references to occultism. The exact denomination of this church doesn't seem important, but the state would likely indicate Protestant or perhaps Orthodox, given the Balkan name. The woman here references gyromancy to predict Harry entering the church, which is a divination method performed by forming a circle and placing a letter of the alphabet on a piece of paper all around it, and then you just spin around a lot, and then whatever letters you land on spell out some kind of word to predict the future. So she was playing Drunken Sailor until she got the name Harry, which is a ridiculous visual. The Path of the Hermit refers to tarot cards, which are far more mainstream. The hermit being a figure meant to represent someone isolated from society, either soul-searching for a higher purpose, or they're withdrawn from people emotionally or physically, which could have some interesting implications about Harry. Finally, Flauros is the name of a demon depicted in several books on demonology, the study of demons. If the circle in the courtroom in the nightmare world wasn't enough, there are some screaming supernatural things affecting Silent Hill, and Harry has to suffer through them to find Cheryl. We run westward of Silent Hill, shooting or avoiding the same enemies as usual, sometimes saving and sometimes gradually lowering the drawbridge with the key we obtain to get into central Silent Hill. This wing of town is a lot more open-ended, featuring little to no roadblocks at all, so naturally a curious player will be encouraged to explore for items. There unfortunately isn't a whole lot to do with this part of town, so I did spend a lot of time aimlessly wandering. The game has taught you, perhaps unkindly, to explore and how navigation generally works, and you should have a grip on how combat works by now. So exploring here takes a fraction of the time it did in old Silent Hill, which is a sign that the game can effectively teach even the most sheltered and knuckle-headed zoomer how to play, but it also doesn't leave a whole lot of breathing room between the next interior dungeon. All there really is to do, you can visit the police station, where you can find the shotgun if you missed it in the school previously, yet there's still no Sybil. There is some extra stockpiles of items and save points all around, but you really don't need most of these, trust me. I'm glad the game does give you so many things to experiment and stockpile with, in case you're really bad at the game, but even a casual player will have plenty to play with by this point. Even on my first playthrough, I was feeling okay. Oh, actually, there is one more thing to the police station. On the blackboards, something about a flower called White Claudia, potentially being used for drug trafficking. Keep that in mind for later. Right after obtaining our map of the place, we're introduced to another character, a doctor who works at this hospital, Michael Kaufman, voiced by Jerian Monroe.
Thank God, another human being.
He explains he was sleeping in the break room, and then the hospital just kinda looked like this. Which is interesting, because we've yet to really understand the perspective of someone more familiar with the town. I don't think that the old bat in the church looked trustworthy enough to take her word on anything, but this guy seems pretty normal. So Silent Hill appeared normal, and suddenly wasn't. What caused everyone to abandon town? How did this guy sleep through it? The cutscene direction is truly interesting. It might seem stiff and awkward, and it kind of is, But for 1999, it was some seriously hot work. Final Fantasy VIII came out the same year, and I think Silent Hill is one of the PlayStation's most cinematic experiences. Not quite the level of Vagrant Story, but absolutely in the running. That's because they had Takayoshi Sato, the cutscene director for the CGI segments. Everything about Sato's past in the industry sounds brutal and nothing short of a hellish time, so the literal thousands of hours spent rendering dynamic scenes that felt intentionally uncomfortable, eerie, and puzzling were worth it. Kaufman doesn't stick around long enough to answer questions and minds his own business, so we're on our own again. The hospital's dungeon design is similar enough to the school's, so I don't need to repeat myself, but there is something interesting we can collect. There's a plastic bottle item, and you can find some spilled red liquid on the ground here, which we can put into the bottle and make an item for later. Perhaps for a puzzle. All we need to do is activate the generator downstairs to make the elevator work, which can take us anywhere to the bottom floor or to the third floor, but the second floor is locked off, so we've hit a dead end. But going back inside the elevator, a fourth floor has mysteriously appeared, despite not being on the map or elevator buttons at all. An excellent move. There's that girl again, and now the hospital can really start. What were once almost cozy hallways have been replaced with rusted and bloody, narrow floor grates. We get new enemies, slumped over nurses and doctors. I thought they were just monsters that happened to look like nurses at first, but supplementary material for the game calls these parasites, with some kind of worm creature sticking out of their backs to take over their minds and bodies completely, which weren't exactly clear in the 1999 graphics. These nurses and doctors take a hell of a lot more abuse. They eat multiple shotgun blasts. You will have very quickly chewed through most of your handgun ammunition on these guys, so you're gonna need a better weapon, and the basement has our answer. The hammer. The hammer is a melee weapon that works like the pipe, but deals much more damage but renders you entirely stationary. It has the longest range of any melee weapon in standard runs, and can hit multiple enemies at once. So I highly recommend you just force yourself to engage with the very awkward melee combat for the Nightmare Hospital, if just to save ammo for later fights. We need to unlock the door by finding various plates around the warped 3 floors: Turtle, Cat, Queen, and Hatter. Clear reference to Alice in Wonderland. Navigating is a lot easier because the elevators in the Nightmare Hospital is turned on from the start. The plate puzzle is quite easy, because we have another poem just to go off of. Take note of what colored plates are already there and match them up with the poem's order. Most of the puzzles I've noticed are very simple. Just follow out written instructions or use basic intuition. Like here, there are vines covering this grate we need to get into, and you should have picked up a lighter by this point. Using just the lighter isn't enough, however. But if you douse the vines in rubbing alcohol prior, another item we found, then it works. Using both of these items is far from a demanding task to figure out because it's very straightforward. You got your 2 styles of puzzles. Wordplay puzzles, where you need to follow instructions or a poem or read between the lines to get a metaphor that ranges from clever to that's BS, or it tells you to find an item. The other one is a very simple use X to get Y, like throwing a blood pack at a whatever that is. He's feasting on a puddle of blood, and naturally a hospital is going to have something like that, so throwing this item to the monster to distract it makes sense in setting and makes the player feel clever for doing something that, while basic, wasn't spelled out for them. We can find a VHS tape in the Nightmare Hospital's 2nd floor, and a TV in the 3rd room, where we can play the tape. It's too garbled to properly understand, but we can make out what sounds like a doctor talking about a patient with a fever. Something going on about their skin, and apparently this patient is a child. We learn nothing past this, but this tape does bring up a question. What year does Silent Hill take place in? That question might not seem important, but fast forwarding a little bit, there are games placed before and after this game chronologically. I think it at least deserves a mention. It's all but confirmed that this game takes place in the mid-1980s. Given the lack of computers around the normal hospital, analog technology, perhaps even the Jeep Harry drives in the intro, this would all coincide well with some of the more popular horror films and novels of all time. because the late 70s and 80s introduced a lot of classic stories that are still being adapted to this day. It's kind of funny to imagine Harry slaving over a typewriter for his novels. I wish we got to know more about his writing career. He's like a straight-laced and non-alcoholic version of Alan Wake. Regardless, we can finally enter the basement after jumping through the grate, where we can find a bed, a key to the exam room, and a photo of a girl named Alessa. And she's a dead ringer to the girl that we saw in the intro, and perhaps the one causing the nightmare locations. The bed here is warm, implying someone was recently laying here. Hello, nurse. Yet another new character is introduced at this hospital, and this is Lisa Garland, voiced by Thalasi Lerner.
Harry, tell me what's happening here. Where is everybody?
A very scared nurse who has no clue what's going on. Harry tries to describe what's really going on in the basement, but an alarm siren makes him wake up in the normal hospital? So he just wakes up like the nightmare part was a nightmare. Stranger still, we meet the crazy woman from before, who reveals her name, Dahlia Gillespie. I can summarize this entire conversation in one word:
Darkness.
She tells us that Silent Hill is in immediate, grave danger, and the only way to stop it is to find the other church, which can be accessed with another key she hands us. I'm beginning to see a pattern. She used the crests we see on the ground, now named the Mark of Samael, as evidence for a potential demonic invasion. Samael is an extremely specific name, because he does not appear in the Bible, at least not in the King James Version, New International, or English Standard, but rather in much later Talmudic texts or works like the Book of Enoch. He's described as an angel of destruction, an adversary of mankind who tempts them into misdeeds. It all sounds very demonic, but his name means venom of God, a trend following all the recognized angel names. They point to the Lord himself, so Samael might still be an angel of God, making his crest appearing all over town that much worrisome. But you know what worries me even more? Getting to that stupid antique shop. You just throw it into the wild and expect to find it. Good luck, asshole. Unless you check the phone book in the hospital reception. Yes, a phone book carries a map location, and I've played this game 3 times and it still trips me up. Maybe it was more natural for 90s kids, but phone books are just so uncommon now that I don't even think about looking at them. It's like Gen Alpha kids not understanding Cinderella's name being a play on words showing how much of a laborer she was under her stepmother. It's a funny detail, it's just lost the unyielding sands of time. I eventually found the antique shop, well after having my hair stand on end hearing this particular soundtrack. I know exactly what Yamoka sampled to make this sound, but it still makes me so anxious and on edge, like something is ready to just blindside me and wipe my game, like the freezer is waiting around the corner. The town's ambient themes changing with your progress throughout the game was an incredible maneuver for making Silent Hill feel alive and breathing. There's also these new enemies. They work kind of like the dogs do, just faster and tankier. The creature design of this game is done by Masahiro Ito. Yes, that Masahiro Ito. His role expanded a lot more with the further series entries. While his skill is very clearly present here, I wasn't exactly blown away with the designs of the monsters here. Silent Hill's reputation is that every monster is ultra-symbolic and too deep 5U. And while Silent Hill 1 isn't at fault for not having this, it simply just wasn't a thing, I wouldn't write home about what you have to shoot down, even knowing the context of what these things actually mean later on. Anyways, I found the antique shop, no thanks to me missing the map. Sybil's back! She didn't die, apparently, rather she spent a lot of time wandering around, even seeing Cheryl. But apparently she was walking on thin air, so perhaps she just saw an apparition. She doesn't know anything about this Dahlia woman, but she suggests she might be under the effect of some kind of drug, because the local police from the towns nearby were investigating a mass trafficking ring in the area. something you could find out for yourself if you revisit the police station after the hospital. Silent Hill is a fent crisis, huh? Told you it's Canadian. I know this is abrupt, but I have to get something off my chest. You've almost definitely heard this game has bad voice acting, something that was a staple of late 90s games. But I'm here to rebuke that. The voice acting of Silent Hill 1 is often jarring, and perhaps even a little hammy, but it's actually quite good, especially compared to its compatriots.
I went after her, but she vanished. I don't know about your daughter, but...
And you just let her go? Where was it?
On Bachman Road. She was heading towards the lake. Now don't get excited. Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
I don't know how this game got a reputation for bad voice acting, to be honest. There was very clear vocal direction with the English dub. I can't speak for the Japanese original, though. The odd timing and space between character dialogue even enhances how surreal and off-center this situation is, an intentional awkwardness that sticks out like a sore thumb. I would say Silent Hill has aged tremendously in the vocal department, actually. You may have noticed that while I keep bringing up each character's voice actor, I never brought up Harry's, and that's for good reason. His voice actor was unknown for decades, technically making it Silent Hill's longest unsolved mystery. It might seem silly, right? Just check the credits. But Harry's voice was credited as Michael G., which, that could be anyone. It wasn't until 2018 until we got confirmation it was Michael Gwynn. Oh, you know, the guy who voiced Dracula in Symphony of the Night.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk. Have at you!
It might seem absurd that the man who spoke one of the most famous lines in video game history went basically unaccredited for decades as the protagonist to one of the most iconic horror games ever made. But many 90s games and even 2000s games had outrageously bad habits of not properly crediting people, or crediting under a very hard to find pseudonym, and Konami was no different. We just found out who voice acted the boss in Metal Gear Solid 3 this year. It doesn't really have to do much with the video, but I feel like it's an incredibly interesting fact how Harry's voice was properly given a name and face years after it came out. Gwyn did an excellent job at sounding bewildered and a little naive, but brave and compassionate.
It's like I was there, but not really. It's all a blur, like some kind of hallucination, you know?
Sybil wants to check out a crawl space recently revealed, but Harry tells her to stay the hell back, which she does. Despite being a cop, she can't help but let some random guy she met 2 hours ago tell her what to do. That crawl space revealed the other church, a small altar dedicated to something that definitely isn't Jesus. The most interesting thing here is the axe, our last melee weapon, but don't even bother. It's better than the pipe, but still totally outclassed by the hammer. When we try to leave, the candles flicker on, and Harry vanishes from the other church, and back to the Nightmare Hospital with Lisa. Lisa doesn't seem able to leave her hiding spot from the Nightmare Hospital, but she can illuminate some details for us, since she worked at the hospital when it was normal. She reveals that Dahlia Gillespie has a reputation as a nut job in town, not surprising, because her child was killed in a fire. Lisa explains that the older residents of town were often into occultism, which caused the younger people to flee, and the elders to double down, until people from away relocated to Silent Hill, which caused a split of occult original inhabitants and naive newcomers, explaining why some town residents like Dahlia are cuckoo, while others like Lisa and Michael seem pretty normal. When these newcomers tried to develop more infrastructure, a series of accidents prevented this, which led to a reputation that the town itself was outright cursed. We don't even get time to think about it because Harry takes another nap and ends up back in the antique shop, but entirely submerged in the nightmare world. There's been some in-universe debate that the nightmare world is something unique to Harry, Lisa, and that strange girl that looks like Cheryl, because Sybil has no idea what Harry is talking about when he mentions it. Most likely Michael wouldn't either, but we can think about it later, because the entire town has been plunged into darkness, and we need to find a way back to the original hospital. The only way through is through a department mall.
Cheryl!
Cheryl's whereabouts have become much more disturbing, because she's begging and pleading for her dad to help. But given that the mark of Samael is there, we have a likely answer to who her captors are. We're on to our next boss encounter, and I hate to break it to you, but it's an even easier version of the split lizard from the school. Say it with me. You awkwardly run around a small arena and take pot shots when you have the chance. It's the exact same format every single time. But when you win this fight, don't just leave yet. Tucked away in the corner is our final firearm, the hunting rifle. It has the longest range and deals the most damage, but renders you stationary. Ammo is incredibly scarce, and the firepower is honestly just unnecessary for all the enemies you're going to encounter by this point. It's not that it's a bad weapon, but I can only recommend it for 2 points in the entire game, and you'll see why. We get to the hospital and Lisa tells us the only way to get to the lake, where we need to go next, is blocked. So we have to run up this set of stairs to fight a giant moth creature, our third boss. Less than 10 minutes after our second. And say it with me now, you run awkwardly around a small arena and take pot shots when you have the chance. It's the exact same format every single time, but the arena is smaller. It's kind of strange pacing to have two similar bosses like within 10 minutes of each other. I don't mind it, it's just a bit weird. Just unload the hunting rifle. This is one of 2 places you'd even want to use that thing. You're fine. Silent Hill is back to normal, or as normal as it can possibly get, and we have to find a shortcut to the lake, which involves taking the sewers. I hate this part. Just flat out hate it. I don't think there's anything remotely enjoyable about the sewer section of this game. It's far and away the most tedious and outright boring stretch of the campaign. It's a sewer. Of course you're going to hear water dropping and it's going to be dark. There is no interesting scenery, no fun encounters. It's just this stretched out, miserable, linear, dank experience that feels like padding. The second playthrough in easy mode for footage only lasted like 20 minutes, but I easily spent over an hour here on my first time wasting it. Especially if you're low on health and ammo, like I was the first time. Getting to the stockpiles here is a pain in the dick because you have to run all the way in the opposite direction of where you need to be and get jump scared by giant praying mantises? What, no sewer croc enemies? It just feels like such an uninteresting slog, where no other point in the game felt like it. Once we exit, we get to our final part of Silent Hill, the resort area. And boy does it feel like it. It's extremely open-ended and rife to explore. It's the smallest part of Silent Hill, but also has the smallest amount of roadblocks. And many buildings are fully open with all the items you could ever want. That's how I find Michael Kaufman getting attacked by whatever this was in the diner. You need to head to the lighthouse, but the town becomes the nightmare version right in front of your eyes, which seems to deconfirm that the nightmare town is a part of Harry's mind, or whatever, when he passes out, and that reality itself warps at seemingly random points. I love that we're offered different in-universe explanations for the events happening from different characters' viewpoints. It really aids you in immersing you with the character's struggles as you play. We meet up with Sybil and eventually Dahlia instead of a safehold, and Dahlia tells us the only way to save the town is to find Cheryl, because she's going to be used as a sacrifice for the demon taking the child's form, strongly implying that this Alessa figure we've been seeing is in fact Samael. But I'm a little concerned that since Alessa and Cheryl look so similar... No, that's ridiculous. Harry and Sybil have to split up to the lighthouse and the amusement park to do something. Sybil heads to the amusement park while Harry to the lighthouse. I'm loving this little ragtag team we've got here. Harry is our unlikely hero, an ordinary man and father thrown into circumstances beyond his understanding for his daughter. Sybil is an officer of the law dragged into all of this but willing to lay her life on the line for Harry's daughter. Lisa as a meek but helpful ally to Harry. Dahlia is out of her mind, but clearly knows a little bit of what's going on, and Dr. Kaufman being a lone wolf of sorts and looking for something on his own. Though Dahlia doesn't seem to like Sybil very much, because it's strongly implied that Sybil's being sent out to her death. The entire town has become metal grates once again, which makes our trek to the lighthouse extremely laggy. At least it was for me. Silent Hill wasn't exactly the most stable game out there, but these segments do get a little bit crunchy, especially by the amusement park. Oh my. Speaking of the amusement park, something's wrong with Sybil, because she's opening fire. She's being controlled by something, and we have to crossroad here. We could shoot her down, which takes forever because she has an absurd amount of health and does a lot of damage very quickly. So you could unload shotgun shots Watsonly and guzzle health drinks, but she takes an almost suspicious amount of bullets. Like, we're not supposed to kill her. But is there anything else we can do? The Fluoros does nothing, but what about the liquid we picked up at the hospital? It turns out that red liquid can save people from the parasites infecting them. We get a very illuminating, but also touching moment between Harry and Sybil, with some excellent cinematography.
Harry, what happened?
Shh, don't talk. I'll take care of you.
Harry, why did they take your daughter? Why her?
I'm not sure myself. But, you know, Cheryl isn't my biological daughter. I actually haven't told her yet. She probably already knows anyway, though. We found her abandoned on the side of the highway. Nobody knew where she came from. We didn't have any kids of our own. My wife was sick, and it didn't look like she was getting any better. So we took Cheryl in.
So in that case...
there might be some connection between Cheryl and this town.
So what do you do now?
Cheryl is my daughter. I will save her no matter what.
There's so much profound camera shots here. It's such a gentle but powerful use of the medium to make you feel uneasy, but totally engrossed in the moment. Cheryl actually isn't Harry's biological daughter. She was adopted. Off the side of the highway? Oh my goodness! Who would leave a baby there? Harry's wife, Jody, couldn't conceive because of her illness. But they chose to adopt Cheryl, and they had a happy family life. But Harry has long realized that Cheryl may have connections to Silent Hill. But he doesn't care. She's his daughter, and he's going to save her. End of story. What a good dad. That speech seems to attract Alessa, or Samael, whoever she is. Despite whatever supernatural powers she has, the Fluoros activates on her own and stuns her, which makes way for the true mastermind behind everything, Dahlia. Alessa is Dahlia's child and has been pulling the strings this whole time, manipulating both her daughter and Harry for some insidious plan involving Cheryl. Every location she told us to go to was to aid her goal. Lisa told us Dahlia's child, Alessa, died in a fire, so her phantasm has been haunting Silent Hill ever since, but only now has she become fully controlled by her mother. Before we have a chance to follow them, Harry passed out, and ends up back in the hospital with Lisa. Well, not exactly. Welcome to nowhere. Silent Hill's final dungeon and area. Once you've reached this point, there's no going back. You're stuck here. So I'm going to address the elephant in the room. There's no map for this area. I looked everywhere, high and low, but it simply isn't there. And I hate it. Mind you, nowhere is laid out exceptionally similarly to the Nightmare Hospital, which wasn't that long ago. So most people would have some memory of that layout. But there are enough new elements to make navigating this place extremely frustrating without the aid of a map. It feels like such a cheap way to enhance difficulty, like if your flashlight just stopped working at this point. Would that really be fun? This is an extremely puzzle-dense area, so I don't really want to describe where you get every single item and how to use it, because some work exactly like how you'd expect them. Like you find a pair of pliers here, get the key here from it. Simple stuff. Doesn't really mesh well with my linear format to explain everything in exhaustive detail unless it presents new information, or I have something substantial to say about it, or gag. But I will say I feel incredibly mixed about the puzzle here. I do like some of them. There's a puzzle that requires you to assign numbers to specific symbols here, but it's the zodiac, and there are examples of what other symbols are with a corresponding number, so you just fill in the blanks from there. And in case you didn't know, I know my zodiac. I read Homestuck as a teenager. Fefri was my favorite. However, I know a lot of other people who feel like this puzzle is some cheeky nonsense, which is kind of how I feel about the Reaper's list, where you have to decipher that you need to list people from youngest to oldest, but you have to enter the first letter of their names in the password screen. Wow, you like a puzzle you could easily solve and hate the ones that take more brain power, huh? This light puzzle can suck my... You have to memorize a basic shape by using a camera you find early on to snap a photo of these paintings and enter it here on these pads. But I swear, they are so sensitive when it comes to recognizing the shape you need to enter. I felt like such an idiot having to look at that separate sketch I made to remember those shapes and kicking myself because one button is off from making an acute triangle. I will say that even the puzzles I felt weren't fun to figure out at least gave me the feeling of, oh my god, I'm an idiot, instead of blinding rage like it's a Q-Team puzzle in Zero Time Dilemma. Seriously, that Biolab puzzle's cheeky is how I would describe the puzzles in this game, and a lot of the series' future entries as well. It's never too obscure or asking huge leaps of logic, which was very common for 90s game puzzles. Seriously, play almost any point and click and take in the breadth of the moon logic. But there is something to be said about how so many of these puzzles are front-loaded here. Every other dungeon has a healthy mix of puzzle solving, exploration, combat, story revelations. And I think Nowhere's pacing of these crucial elements is very mishandled. You get a lot of puzzles right at the start, which means you're going to be bouncing between them a lot if you get stuck. Exploration is a bit spotty as well. So much of Nowhere is made up of the Nightmare Hospital, so it all feels seen this before, but there are occasionally new locations to feast on, like a suspended classroom instead of with only one desk, with insults carved directly into the desk. There's also this kitchen area with a big fridge that stands out. If you leave the room, well, you have to use this ring item you obtain to lock the fridge and prevent an instant death from whatever's in there. Is it total dick move and feels like almost you're designed to fail? Kinda. I don't care. It's Kino. There's also a room in the basement covered in scribbles and drawings, with a younger, ghostly version of Alessa sobbing in the corner. Combat is really uninteresting because it's the same nurse and doctor foes as before. I honestly don't know if you can take more bullets than the ones previously, but it just makes this whole area feel recycled, repetitive. Other negative words that start with R. However, there's more to the story coming up real soon. Lisa has something to share. She says she's as the same as them. She's figured out why she's here, but starts to bleed from her skull as she pleads with Harry for help, but it's too late. As this melancholic, somber tome plays, her diary is left behind for us to read, letting us know that Lisa's been sick for a while, and addicted to some kind of drug, which seemed to take its effect just now. Lisa's death is one of the most famous moments not only of the game, but in the entire franchise. But to be honest, I don't really feel the same. Lisa as a character is fine, I don't feel strongly about her, but when I saw her kind of just randomly die out of nowhere for no reason, I laughed out loud because of how sudden and ridiculous it was. I thought she was gonna turn into a zombie because Harry leaves her ass and keeps her locked in the room, then her corpse just vanishes. Regardless of how I feel, Lisa's kind of an icon for this game, especially for women. Women are obsessed with this character, and I just don't get it. I'm missing something, clearly. Please explain to me in the comments what I'm not getting here. What they were getting at with this is that Lisa has always been dead, but she only realized it just now, because the Nightmare version of Silent Hill has exceptional qualities, and we know that ghosts can linger, but there is more to the story. Remember the tape. Well, you've actually kept the tape with you the whole time, and you can find another TV further in that lets us see what's being said with other distortions. It's Lisa speaking, and she's describing the same patient, describing someone charred, burnt, and disfigured, with confirmation that it's a child burnt, but still alive. Lisa's story feels kind of but the stuff about Alessa and Dahlia is phenomenal. We get a ghostly apparition as a flashback of Dahlia and a bunch of doctors, one of which is clearly Dr. Kaufman, Explaining the process of the ritual, it's been hinted at since the beginning. Alessa is to give birth to something terrible and evil, but a complication has arrived. Alessa's soul has somehow been split, and they need to find it. Kaufman doesn't seem interested in what's going on. He's more concerned about Dahlia holding up some end of a deal they made together, more than he cares about Alessa. The answers are so close, I can almost taste them. We're almost there. We reach our final save point, Alessa's bedroom. Photographs of butterflies and moths are framed, children's books like The Wizard of Oz on the bookshelf, drawings on the ground depicting colorful monsters, but it looks small, cramped, without love. It looks like a child's room, but there's no affection from a doting parent here. It feels like a residential school room. Even without the other cutscenes outright showing it, we can tell exactly what kind of mother Dahlia was to Alessa. Completely heartless, and viewed her baby like a tool. It reminds me of real-life cases of neglectful parents and how their bedrooms looked. There's a locked door with 5 keys, but these aren't traditional keys, but rather symbols. The Amulet of Solomon, Crest of Mercury, an Ankh, Dagger of Melchior, and a Disc of Ouroboros. Each of these containing deep symbolism for real religions and cult practices. The Amulet of Solomon is just the Star of David, a hexagram representing Jewish faith and identity, the biblical King Solomon, who can control demons to do his bidding in many apocryphal texts. The hexagram is a classic symbol of ritualism and magic because so much of that field originates from biblical practices. Next is the Crest of Mercury, representing the Roman god of traveling and messengers. Though the dev team made a mistake, because this is the wrong symbol. The single snake represents an entirely different god, Asclepius. The dual snakes is for Mercury. Remember, the dev team is Japanese, so much of this information still comes from foreign nations, so errors creeping in is understandable, just as Westerners would make errors about aspects of the Asian world. The Dagger of Melchior is a lot more obscure. Melchior is the name of one of the 3 biblical magi, better known as the 3 wise men. What is a magi? Well, that's a complicated answer. We actually don't know a whole lot about the 3 wise men, but many scholars are comfortable dubbing them as Persian mages. Mage in that context referring to Zoroastrianism, and often as an advisor or magician for a ruler or emperor. You know those 2 guys from the Prince of Egypt? Different religion, but that's kind of what they do. So, the Dagger of Melchior under this definition is a Zoroastrian relic of sorts. The Ankh is quite a common symbol for ancient Egypt, but what does it mean? It's a hieroglyphic that means life, both in the literal sense and the symbolic sense of power, child-rearing, etc. Ancient Egyptian religion is very complicated, but just picture Horus, because he used the Ankh like a red pill. Finally, we have the Disc of Ouroboros. Almost everyone knows what this is and what it means. It symbolizes cycles, like the cycle of the seasons, life, etc., wholeness and unity. Its exact cultural origins are kind of spotty to nail down as one definitive thing, but it's become so widespread that it almost breaks that, becoming a symbol for anything pagan, or just life itself with no religious connotations. But all of these things together being used as locks rumble some deep implications. Most of these symbols have history of being used in general occultism and alchemy, which makes sense given that a ritual is being performed. But they call out so many different groups of faith to try and conduct their unholy deed. Ancient Jewish Kabbalah, the pagan faith of the Romans and Egyptians, the ancient faith of Zoroastrianism, and the Ouroboros, a recurring symbol throughout history. This cult Dahlia belongs to fashions itself as outwardly Christian, having control of the churches in Silent Hill. But the practice is the exact opposite, choosing black magic and demonic worship, no matter how much they want to call it God. Using these symbols, we can unlock the door. Just before the final battle, we get a ghostly flashback of Dahlia demanding Alessa lend her some of her power for a previous ritual. We get a small snippet into the home life of the Gillespie family, and it's about as tragic as you can possibly imagine. Nothing about this home feels lived in, no love here. The final battle is ahead of us. There's a lot of dialogue, so I'll summarize. Dahlia has the ghostly Alessa and an unknown figure wheelchair-bound, wrapped in bandages. Well, that's what you're led to believe. This isn't Alessa. It's been 7 years since a horrible accident happened to Alessa, but she didn't die. No. She's been alive this whole time, her entire body wrapped and burnt in a fire, unable to move. In her grief and her rage, she used her supernatural powers to somehow split her soul into a little baby on the side of the road, Cheryl. And Cheryl has returned to her proper form, but it's too late. Cheryl and the charred Alessa fuse, because the ritual Dahlia made was to have Alessa be the Mother of God, and she transforms into an almost divine, heavenly figure, a mockery of the Virgin Mary. Alessa, or as she's now known, the Incubator, shows off her new form by electrocuting Dahlia to death, rendering her to a flaming corpse, and now we need to fight her. Unlike every other boss, the Incubator is completely stationary, but has a force field that pushes you back if you get too close. Its only attack is to throw lightning bolts at you, so you're given two choices: run in aggressive circles to try and dodge the bolts, or just stand there and eat hits and gobble all of your health items. Since you won't be needing them anymore, this is why you should save all your hunting rifle ammo, completely unload every bullet you didn't use against the moth, and, well, man, this boss just sucks, just like every other boss. The lightning hits really hard and you will die in like 3 hits, so I hope you stockpiled health. But what if you run out of bullets? I think you can still win. You just don't have ammo in your inventory. There should be a check that the boss will just kill itself shortly after. No matter how you look at it, this encounter is just clumsy. Never has gunning down your own child felt this unsatisfying. With her dying breath, Cheryl thanks Harry for finally putting her down, taking away all of her pain, and she dies.
Daddy.
Cheryl!
Thank you, Daddy. Goodbye.
With the game ending right then and there, Sybil has to snap Harry out of his grief, but the camera just pans away from the crumbling ritual site, the fates of the two completely unknown, and the game kind of just ends. Is that it? Really? It sucked! What? The revelation that Cheryl was a reincarnation of Alessa just flies by like a bullet, with a booty final boss and an ending that leaves so many breadcrumbs you can use it to coat chicken. I don't want to sugarcoat it. I hated this ending. This is awful. This is genuinely a pain in the ass. This sucks. I hate it. I'm almost shocked Team Silent said this was okay. When I beat this game for the first time, at first I was fuming. I felt rage, shortly followed by so much hollowness and despair and ennui. Like my journey meant nothing, because I got such a boring, worthless ending that leaves way too much on the table. Does one of the most iconic horror games of all time really just have such a tepid and trash ending? Well, you're gonna want to stick around past the credits scene. You get a scoreboard ranking your performance, showing how often you saved, how long it took you to beat the game, but also your ending and game clears. I got the bad plus ending, and I've cleared the game once. What does this mean? Well, that means not only are there multiple endings, you aren't meant to beat the game once. You're meant to play it multiple times. Welcome to Our journey hasn't ended here. It's only begun, truly. Out of every experimental option and tactic Team Silent implemented for this game, the second playthrough is perhaps the most daring and bold, and here's why. When you start Next Fear, the game starts as normal, no differences. But you notice things that you might have missed. When Harry grabs the map at the start, you can actually see the monster that breaks through the window flash for a few times. It's always been there. Things you may have glanced over or paid no mind to or not even noticed become all the rage as the beginning chapters blaze by. You have no trouble finding the alleyway, remembering where all the keys are in no time, finding the school in 30 minutes. The frustration I described in the initial chapters of this video melt away, revealing a much more condensed, satisfying experience that you personally achieved. This was the intended effect, to throw you to the wolves on your first run, and have you leading them the next. My runtime for the second run of this game was half of what it was the first time around, and shorter still the third time. Figuring out where to go and how to solve the puzzles is the majority of the runtime. So when you come around that information after a first run, you become far more equipped to handle whatever threats are in your way, and the game accounts for all of this. The difficulty is bumped up a notch, meaning enemies will always take more hits and you can take less. There are a lot of specifics to Next Fear, but one of the more entertaining ones is that additional weapons can be found. If you clear certain requirements, the doghouse can reveal a hidden room with a katana, far and away the best melee weapon in the game, only available after you beat it. This prevents each playthrough from being the same, unless you play the game close to 5-6 times to see everything. Yes, 5 to 6 times, because there are 5 dedicated endings. And some things are only obtainable if you get a certain number of items or endings beforehand. Only in Next Fear, as a dedicated side quest where Harry can find an item and get abducted by aliens for a hidden gag ending, which is kind of out there. But how do you achieve each ending exactly? Well, this is where the ultimate gambit of time is revealed. The biggest ask the developers have of the player, playing the game fully multiple times, and it's achieved with varying results. I got the bad plus ending, with Cheryl and Alessa fusing, then dying, with Sybil at her side. If it felt rushed and unsatisfying, well, it's kinda supposed to. I got a bad ending after all. If you didn't use the liquid to save Sybil, then you have to kill her and you get the outright bad ending, revealing that the entire game was merely a figment of Harry's imagination as he crashed his car in the intro and died, the implications of which I will bring up later. But how do we get the good ending? Well, do you remember when we found Dr. Kaufman in the diner during the resort area? Well, turns out I missed his dropped wallet on the ground, which gives us a note on a specific location to check out, the motel area, including a key of the room Kaufman was staying in at some point. Through some light puzzle solving, we can find another vial of that red liquid we got from the hospital that saves Sybil. Kaufman catches us and takes the liquid for his own purpose. Incredibly suspicious. With this, we've hit all the required points to get the good ending. But how would you know to do this? You don't. And that's the part that sucks. If you didn't go completely out of your way to follow the breadcrumb trail of a side quest, your ending is guaranteed to be bad. Which is just a sliver above a daring task from Team Silent. That's almost infuriating. It's not that you're being asked to do something unconventional, but the fact that the bad endings just suck ass don't help. Not everyone is gonna finish this game, period, but being asked to do it twice is demanding. I mean, it's not hard. It's not that hard. But you do know how many secondaries this series has, right? People who say they love it and have never actually played it. Silent Hill is one of the all-time OG platinum, triple platinum and fake fans, especially the first game. It demands a lot of attention and dedication. Silent Hill usually rewards you for all that, but I can't help but feel it kind of punishes you at the same time, if only slightly, for a casual playthrough without a guide in any form. Do you think some random Jub the Nub is gonna know this? This is the ultimate gambit, and the scales are so tightly balanced that my opinion frequently jumps between too deep 5U Kino and esoteric nonsense. I would honestly argue a blind playthrough of this game can just be a genuinely rough experience, depending on your tolerance for getting domed and lost. But this is the biggest filter Silent Hill 1 has in its gameplay. End of story, and it frustrates me. I don't even know if there's like a real hint. You just have to kind of stumble across Kaufman there, notice that teeny tiny wallet, and then just figure it out from there. The side quest isn't hard to really do. It's almost spelled out, but like just finding it is kind of crazy. It's a huge assumption. But what happens now that we've saved Sybil and Dr. Kaufman? The gameplay is exactly the same, and Alessa and Cheryl have fused together. But as soon as the incubator is formed, Dr. Kaufman walks in the scene, shoots Dahlia in the chest, and uses the red liquid to force the monster inside Alessa to crawl out and reveal itself. The incubus, the male counterpart to the infamous succubus. And its first act of life is to roast Dahlia alive in thunder and lightning. The fight is very similar to the incubus fight, with you needing to unload the hunting rifle inside of him. The squealing you hear is the radio going crazy. the demonic presence being as overwhelming as it is. But what exactly is an incubus? It's the child Alessa was carrying, because the ritual was meant to impregnate her and birth the dark god Dahlia worships. So its name is most likely Samael, the angel of death, revealed to be a demon. It takes on the form of a Baphomet, a monster that mixes human and animal, male and female, a symbol inextricably tied with occultism, alchemy, and demonic influence. But eventually, we take it down. This fight kinda sucks too. Alessa still dies, but she hands Harry something new. A baby. A regular, living baby. Without exchanging a single word, Harry says goodbye to his daughter, the spirit of Alessa, but his daughter nonetheless, and takes the new child in his arms, escaping Silent Hill with Sybil at his side. Dr. Kaufman tries to run, but the ghost of Lisa appears to drag him down to his fate in eternal flame. The ending is quick, quiet, but so damn artsy and tasteful that I felt completely satisfied from it. It's heartbreaking watching Harry accept that the woman he raised will no longer be with him, but the child he takes with him has infinite possibilities. Will it be a regular child? Will it contain some kind of demonic influence? A mysterious third thing? Now this is how you do an ambiguous ending. It's sublime. However, there was still a thing that bothered me. Actually, a few things that bothered me. I described the story well enough, I think. But what exactly is the story here? So many of the details I shared felt natural because I was combining my first and second runs information-wise. I had almost no clue what was happening the first time around. A lot of the more subtle details only became known the second or even third time around, which is another effect of the gambit of having to play the game multiple times. The core story of Alessa is understandable, but a lot of the finer details are a little scattershot. What was that red liquid? What was Dr. Kaufman's problem? Why did Lisa do that? What the game asks you to do is spend a lot of time either with yourself or others discussing the random events and details shared with you to piece things together to understand the full story, and only then will the true heart of Silent Hill reveal itself. And that's exactly what I plan to do. Brace yourself, because I will be explaining everything from the story to just how many small details there are to cover that are easily missed. It's deeper than hell. Alessa Gillespie. It all goes back to Alessa Gillespie. Alessa was born to Dahlia Gillespie and an unknown father in the late 1970s. Even in its earliest days, the town of Silent Hill, Maine, has been occupied by a mysterious cult that pretends to be outwardly Christian, but its true desires are as insidious and evil as they are obscured. Dahlia was a high-ranking member of this cult, and when she found out her daughter Alessa had special psychic powers, she took every opportunity to abuse and manipulate her into becoming a vessel for the cult's deity of worship, God, though the name is intentionally misleading and vague. Why is Dahlia in the cult? I don't know, she just is. She's evil, brother. Alessa's life was nothing short of heartbreaking. Her powers, likely psychic in nature, made her a target for the cult, but her quiet and broken demeanor made her a target for intense bullying from her peers, with her desk having horrible insults carved into it telling her to die. Think of her life like Carrie and her mother from the Stephen King novel of the same name. It's so similar that it's clearly intentional. Things heated to a boiling point when Dahlia attempted to conduct a ritual with her at age 7. Things seemed to go horribly wrong, and Alessa ended up with 4th-degree burns over her entire body, so severe that she was rendered immobile. Realizing this error, Dahlia took her to the hospital, where she met Lisa Garland and Michael Kaufman. Kaufman was no resolute doctor. He was as corrupt as they come. He and Dahlia struck a deal. Kaufman would create and distribute a drug, PTV, made from White Claudia, a flower in the area. The drug causes intense hallucinations for the users, and in exchange, Dahlia... Actually, I don't know. There isn't a lot we know about Kaufman's exact relationship with the cult in this game, but it seems transactional, because he's more focused on profits rather than caring about Alessa or anyone else's well-being. So maybe Dahlia gave him money or head, we don't know. But there's a second substance Kaufman brews, this mysterious red liquid. We don't really know what it is, but keep it in mind. What we do know is that Lisa Garland became a very heavy user of PTV, as explained by her diary. Kaufman blackmailed her into nursing Alessa in secret, never letting the world know of her fate, but taking constant care of her. Alessa was trapped, unable to move, traumatized, and mutilated, but she still fought back. Somehow, her soul split from her body, which completely barred the ritual to birth God from happening. Then the soul manifested as a newborn baby on the side of the road for a young couple, Harry and Jodie Mason. They took the babe in as their own, since Jodie's unspecified illness rendered her infertile, and they named her Cheryl. They loved her as their own, but their happy family life broke when Jodie passed away, crushing Harry and leaving him with only his daughter for comfort. The two decided to take a vacation when she was 7 years old, and while passing through, they see a ghostly apparition, the spirit of Alessa, which causes them to crash into Silent Hill. The state of Silent Hill is something left ambiguous. Silent Hill has, or at least had, a community, because there were so many characters we knew about who were living in the town, and the neighboring towns next over know of it as a creepy, but still habitable place. Sybil is just as shocked to see Silent Hill like this as Harry is, but that answer will come later. The cult seems to have abducted Cheryl, or perhaps Cheryl, even at the tender age of 7, the same as Alessa when she was burned, realized who she was, and began to reunite with her other half. Harry's journey leads him all over town, but Dahlia manipulates him and Sybil so she can complete the ritual. The two reunite and become the Incubator, an adult figure pregnant with God. Kaufman, sick of Dahlia's nonsense, double-crosses her, mostly just to save his own skin, throwing that red liquid at the fused Alessa and Cheryl, which caused the baby, perhaps malformed and unrealized, to crawl out of her back as the incubus, most likely named Samael. But we don't know entirely if this is the god being worshipped by the cult or some kind of emissary. Given that Samael is a name that still points to God, my money's on this not being the primary entity of worship. The incubus kills Dahlia, probably because she thought it was funny. Once Harry shoots down the incubus, Alessa seems to finally die in peace, but not before she hands her father, the man who loved her unconditionally, a child. Perhaps another split of her soul like Cheryl was, which lets the spell over Silent Hill end, allowing Harry and Sybil to escape. Kaufman tries to run, but Lisa catches up with him. Lisa only appears in the nightmare version of the hospital, and I finally understand why she suddenly died. She's been dead the whole time, but only now realized it. At some point during the game's events, she realized she overdosed on PTV, causing her to bleed profusely and die on the spot. Kaufman was the one who administered it to her, so as a final act of revenge, her ghost came back to drag him down to hell with her. Alessa's powers manifested as the so-called fog world of Silent Hill, and here's how. Look at the enemies. The very first thing that attacks us, the Air Screamer, is a dinosaur from one of her favorite novels, The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes series. The dogs are called Groaners. The bugs, these are all based off of Alessa's fear of them. The Grey Children and Rompers are her fear of other children and people who would harm her, physically or emotionally. The giant moth is seen on the wall of Alessa's room. The 3 keys you collect at the beginning are from The Wizard of Oz, another children's book. The Splithead, the first boss, is a fairy tale creature brought to life by Alessa's imagination. The puppet doctors and nurses are her fear of the hospital staff who kept her alive. She sees them as puppets of her mother and not living people. The state of Silent Hill, from the calm and foreboding fog world to the violent, shocking, and depraved otherworld, were all manifestations of Alessa, endlessly dreaming in her charred state, only kept alive by the doctors under Dahlia's control, only kept alive to birth God. Her imagination came to life in the most violent forms possible, but there's a bittersweet light at the end of the tunnel. She was able to be loved by someone for the first time, Harry. She felt peace as Harry finally had to kill the incubus. She could give Harry the best gift any child could give their parent, a grandchild. Alessa's life was almost nothing but heart-wrenching and full of abuse and neglect, but Harry showed her another way, and she used that experience to let the righteous escape Silent Hill. I told you Silent Hill was deeper than hell. So much symbolism and references are jam-packed everywhere. It completely recontextualizes the entire game. Though I wish we got to fight some enemy meant to represent Dahlia, since Alessa hates her so much, but Alessa is the manifestation of Silent Hill. she's everywhere. That's why the final dungeon is nowhere, because for most of her life, she's only seen that warped, broken hospital like the Nightmare Hospital. She only knows of the school. All of the main dungeons are just places Alessa frequented as a child. The story of Silent Hill is something that must be pieced together on multiple playthroughs, but it's more than worth it. While it's very simple, the hidden background details, or lore as people call it, is fascinating beyond measure. So many obscure and tucked away references from different horror films, books, actors, writers, even some funnier connections, like the hospital being named after a flower, the thing Kaufman gets his drug from. There are plenty of 2 deep 5U theories you can craft from this framework. Like, look at how similar Jody Mason is to Alessa. Coincidence? Or has Alessa been pulling more strings in Harry's life than we know of? Despite there not being a lot of dialogue, characters like Harry and Alessa feel fleshed out and dynamic, despite their simplicity. A lot of the other characters feel kind of along for the ride, but that's okay. Not much explanation is needed for "I need to find my kid." Harry is a simple man, contrast with the much more troubled leads of future Silent Hill games. But while some find him one-dimensional, I think it's alright. Start small and see where things take you. And there is so much experimentation with the game already, we need some familiar ground to bring us back to reality. It's a big ask, but very rewarding to piece together all the pieces of the narrative. There's probably something cool I've missed, if not a lot of things that people in the comments will remind me of, but that's the fun part of Silent Hill. Each person could submit an idea and debate about it, and given how ambiguous some things are, there are only so many wrong ideas here. But just as interesting as the story in-game is the story of the developers, Team Silent. What happened to this game upon release? Silent Hill was an incredible success immediately, selling over 2 million copies. It earned a greatest hits variant in North America, and pleasantly surprised Konami, who spent very little money on the project. Reviews ranged from overwhelming praise to its distinct art style, despite how much inspiration it took from Resident Evil, to those criticizing its combat and navigation, which are both valid opinions. But in 1999, no one truly knew what Silent Hill would go on to create. How did the development team, Team Silent, react? The project lead, Toyama, celebrated by leaving the company immediately. In an interview in 2013, he stated that he felt he got in the way of other talented members of the team, mainly Yamoka, Sato, and Ito. He left Konami and went to Sony, where he joined Japan Studio, where he would co-direct and write another horror game, Siren, or Forbidden Siren. The rest of the figures I've mentioned stuck with Konami to immediately start work on a sequel, but Silent Hill 2 is another story for another day. A lot of stuff was left on the cutting room floor since development took a while, and there was only so many people assigned to the project. Some members even reported feeling disappointed with the final project upon release, since so much had to be cut due to hardware limitations or time. You could easily make a feature-length video about all the cut content, but again, time and place. Silent Hill, I would argue, is the most legendary horror video game franchise in existence, and it's not hard to see why. Not the best-selling or most popular, but in terms of praise and iconography, it's second to none. It spawned sequels, remakes, sort of, films, novels, a huge franchise that Konami still publishes games for to this day. Despite this legendary status, why is Silent Hill 1 so snubbed? I can give you one good reason now: accessibility. Silent Hill 1 was only ever released on PlayStation 1 in 1999. And then digitally on PS3 and PS Vita stores. Legally playing this game either requires a PlayStation 3 or an original copy, which is a Herculean task, because Silent Hill is absurdly expensive, and because nobody wants to go back to the PS3. Second, the common sentiment that it's outdated. Nearly every discussion about where to start with Silent Hill as a franchise recommends the second game on PlayStation 2, partly because it's such a famous game, but also because it controls in a way that's more graceful to transition from a modern game than Silent Hill 1. And really, it's hard to argue against that. Silent Hill 1's camera, controls, and combat are sluggish and unwieldy, and are absolutely a barrier to entry for a lot of people. The more ambiguous way of piecing together the story is another roadblock. Most of the other Silent Hill games are much more straightforward narratives with clearer character definitions and story arcs. While the first game is very light, on Harry's characterization and outright development until the end, you kind of just bounce from place to place with some new details peppered throughout. This is not a bad thing. I love this aspect a lot, but it still filters people. So combine a game that's hard to get your hands on legally, that requires much more understanding and time for its wonky controls with a much more ambiguous story, and you get a concoction that filters out secondaries like a bug net. A lot of people just get a synopsis for the story, or just watch a playthrough, but this does you no justice other than understanding the bullet points. You need to be there for yourself, to breathe and live in Silent Hill's atmosphere. Besides, if you don't play Silent Hill 1, your enjoyment of most of the franchise is severely diminished. Going forward in time a bit, playing Silent Hill 2 as your first game won't be as satisfying, because you just wouldn't understand how far the team developed their skills, and there's so many little ways that James's journey reflects Harry's. Without going into spoilers, even without a narrative connection, Silent Hill 2 is only strengthened by playing 1. Because Team Silent made Silent Hill 2 as a sequel that is very aware of what Silent Hill 1 was, if that makes sense. Silent Hill 3 is a direct narrative sequel, so that's out of the picture. Silent Hill Origins is a prequel, so again, no. Shattered Memories is... we'll get to that. Homecoming has less character connections to 1, but a lot of its plot is based off of info and events from the first game, so I wouldn't recommend it. The only two I could recommend you playing first without spoiling some or all the experience of the franchise is Silent Hill 4 The Room and Silent Hill Downpour. 4 is very self-contained and doesn't step on any other game's toes, and Downpour is also self-contained to an extent, but you would miss a lot of the references that aren't super important, but are at least cute. So many of these games have direct connections to 1, or work off of 1 being played first, but it's not like you should be put on the cross if you played 2 first. Most people are gonna play 2 first, and it's fine. I just can't recommend it. Konami seemed a little aware of this in 1999, and decided to make 1's story a little more accessible, and in 2001, they released Silent Hill Play Novel, a visual novel version of the game, on the Game Boy Advance. I can't see why it didn't catch on. It never left Japan, but it's very easy to find ROMs floating around for it. I don't know if I would recommend playing the game, but if the controls were just that frustrating to you, then you can at least grasp the story here. It even has a second route where you can play as Sybil. It's actually pretty cool. Silent Hill Shattered Memories is a reimagining of Silent Hill 1 that's so extensive it might as well be its own game. Harry, Cheryl, Sybil, and others are all here, but radically different characters, and there's a completely different story at hand. The gameplay is like nothing else. It's really its own beast. Its own strange, confusing, but underrated Kino beast. Not even the much-hated HD collection has Silent Hill 1. They may or may not have lost the source code for this game, but who knows. But if somehow you don't want to play a video game version, there is a novelization that came out in the early 2000s that, for the most part, is a decent retelling of the game's events. Some small details conflict with in-game info, but it does have a lot to do with fleshing out some of the characters, like how Harry is a true crime writer, and constantly thinks about these cases when out with Cheryl. The illustrations that accompany this book are fantastic, and really stand out as some stellar art. Its status as canon or not is debatable though. Actually, what ending for this game is canon? Well, considering there's a sequel that follows the Good Plus ending, I think we have our answer. But for 1999, any ending was canon. But there's clearly some that are better than others, at least to me. Good Plus is easily the best one, with standard good being the same, but Sybil dies. Both very well written, paced, it just feels right. Bad Plus is booty cheeks, and the outright bad ending is basically a coma theory, like Harry was playing Drawn to Life. It's interesting and I don't hate it. I don't know how I'd feel about it if I got it after 10 hours of playtime though. As for 2024, Silent Hill 1 is untouched and unsupported. Many people crossed their arms when the remake for Silent Hill 2 came out, because they wanted Silent Hill 1 to be remade instead. But if we're engaging in this hypothetical, how much of identity will be kept for a remake? Silent Hill 2 Remake did away with a fixed camera and has a lot of quality of life features not in the previous game. The game's length was basically doubled. There are a lot of changes, both big and small. If Silent Hill 1's fixed camera isn't there, can we even call it Silent Hill 1? Is it really okay to just leave the original version in the dust like that? If a hypothetical remake of this game was made, Does it mean people will jump to that from the 2 remake, and then 3 on PS2, or forbid the HD PS3 versions? Maybe the entire franchise will be remade, but considering how long it takes for AAA video games to come out, do you want to wait 20 years to play a remade version of 1 to a remade version of Downpour? That's long enough to get a Silent Hill 2 remake. And then even then, going from a remake to the sequel which hasn't been remade is an awkward experience. It messes with expectations. I've sort of veered off point, but there has to be a better solution than requiring a full, expensive remake for this game, rather than Konami just putting this digitally on the PS4 and PS5 store. The absolute biggest reason why Silent Hill 1 has been omitted is not entirely because of its stranger gameplay, kind of weird pacing, and sometimes annoying puzzles, weird spaces between bosses, clunky melee combat, strange ambiguous story, weird cutscene direction, strange character interactions. It's because Konami isn't supporting it. They aren't keeping it relevant. They aren't supporting it in the way it needs. This game is responsible for so many sales for Konami, for the entire franchise to exist, but it's left in the dust, destined to sit beside ugly plastic cases for people who weren't smart enough to invest in crypto, so they invest in children's toys to make their fortunes. Silent Hill 1 needs to be more relevant. It needs a port, depending on who you ask, even a remake. It just needs to be relevant in the culture, and not a nigh-forgotten classic piece of horror that's always praised, but never played. The best possible solution is to have the original game easily, if not freely, available, and an HD remake. Just do what Running with Scissors did for Postal 1. Have both versions as easy as possible to access, and everyone's happy. If you disagreed with something I said for Silent Hill 1, good! It means you've played it. And if you haven't, well, I kind of spoiled the whole game for you, but go ahead and play it now. If you have to, download an ISO and use DuckStation. This game deserves to be played. Even if you don't enjoy your time with this game, it's critical to understanding Silent Hill as a whole. I hope this video did a good enough job to convince you if you were feeling otherwise. And for the rest of the franchise, their days will come, but I'm not entirely sure in what order to review them, because my opinions on the rest of the franchise kind of veer off, but I would like to categorize the story of Team Silent, the developers, and just what happened to this franchise, its rise, its fall, and its rise again. But that is something for the long, distant future. Thanks again for tuning in, brothers and sisters. Have a lovely rest of your day.